But first of all, thank you for the welcome and thank you for all coming along this evening. I find that this particular presentation that we do from Cancer Council is one of the more positive ones, because so much about cancer, as you would know, can have a hint of doom and gloom attached to it, whereas this is positive because it's things we can actually do ourselves, and it's all about reducing our risk of getting cancer. Now, I imagine in this group there are a lot of people who are beyond that stage for at least, unfortunately, the first round. But it's never too late to start protection, and it's often handy to know things that you can pass on to the children, the grandchildren, or the people next door, because there's a lot of factual information here. I'm a volunteer speaker with the Cancer Council, which means that I present to you all the information that's prepared by the experts at the Cancer Council. A bit about the Cancer Council. It is an independent and very much a forward-thinking community of people where ideas and charity come together in the fight against all cancers, and that's one of the unique features. The Cancer Council looks at all cancers. Its mission is to defeat cancer through engaging the community, the likes of you and me. It was established in 1955. Today it's the leading cancer charity with the broadest reach of any in New South Wales. It's almost entirely community funded. 96% of the income comes directly from the community and from its investments. The 5 big areas where those investment returns and donations are spent are in research, either the council's own or through grants that are offered to research specialists, patient support and information, in cancer prevention and screening programs, advocacy campaigns right through to the federal level, and networking with individual communities to help meet specific needs. And I think of areas like some of the rural areas with their patient transport, which is such a desperate need. So that's a little bit about my sponsor. Now to look at our topic. And we call this healthy lifestyle. I notice it's diet and exercise. Don't worry, I'm not going to require you to do any push-ups tonight. It'll be all right. But why are we interested in lifestyle? Well, as the slide says, at least a quarter of all cancer cases that we know of are preventable through a healthy lifestyle. And that basically boils down to food intake, food output, diet and exercise. Some of the factors that increase our risk of developing cancer are body weight, lack of physical activity, and you can see there's a link there already, alcohol intake, diets that are low in fruit and vegetables, fibres, whole grains, and diets that are high in red meat, especially processed meat. We'll talk in some more detail about those. And all of those 5 factors, though, are second only to tobacco as the preventable risk factor for cancer. Another major one, though, particularly in this country, is ultraviolet radiation. And we'll talk some more about skin cancers and sun. The information that we're going to hear tonight is all based on research evidence. So if you have any questions about what you've heard or read in the press, I can try and answer that, but the information here is all about research-based, evidence-based research. So to look at the first of our factors, body weight, and that slide is incredibly busy, but basically what we're talking about is obesity and weight as being risk factors for cancer of the bowel, the esophagus, the pancreas, the kidney, the endometrium, and postmenopausal breast cancer. So there's a lot of reason, I feel, to be aware of the impact of weight and obesity. And as well as the cancer clusters, there's also cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, which we now see links from body weight. And there's a couple of indicators that we might use in this area, and people often question me and say, oh, but that's not right because I'm skinny and I've got this, or my grandma was fat and she didn't ever get that. True. But overall, if we think about waist measurement and simple measure, the thing to remember is that weight around your middle is more of a health risk than weight around the hips and thighs. So if you've got a nice hourglass figure, you're in luck. That's a good start. But another more definite thing to do is to actually measure, and I've got a few of these tape measures so you can have some fun later and just have a bit of a measure and see. You may know already. But if we look at these measures, two sides, one side for women, one side for men, and they give us an indication of healthy waist measurement, then getting through to risk area and high risk area. For women, the cutoff for waist measurement is 80 centimetres, and I've got the microphone here, so I'm going to be over. That's my cheaty way of saying I'm not too sure where I sit now. But women, waist measurement over 80 centimetres is risky. Over 88 centimetres is high risk. For men, it's 94 centimetres is the safe range, risky over 94, and very high risk over 102. For women, we measure the waist measurement at the narrowest point. For men, just around about the navel. So subtle differences. So that's waist measurement, and that's all about determining where the fat's sitting. Is it here or is it below? But the other measure that we use quite a lot, and which is referred to in that slide, is body mass index, which is all about taking into account your weight and your height. It says nothing about shape, which is what the waist measurement is saying more about. And for those of you who like some maths, body mass index is calculated as by dividing your weight in kilos by your height in metres squared. So if I weighed 70 kilos and was 1.7 metres high, I would have a body mass index of 70 divided by 1.7 times 1.7, and that turns out to be 24, which if we look in this table is in the normal range. So depending on the relationship between your weight and your height, we get an indication of body mass. And there are some good online tools for calculating this, including on the Cancer Council website. So have a look at that later maybe. And there's a bundle of papers I should have mentioned. There are brochures over on the side table there, including a series of printed pages from the Cancer Council website, and they include quite a bit of the detail of what I'll be talking about tonight. So feel free to take notes if that helps, but don't worry if you miss something, it's probably on the website somewhere. So that's the body mass index, but this is meant to be about tips for you and how to do things and how to help yourself. So if we think about some tips for a healthy body weight, the first one sounds incredibly obvious, but it's not really. Eat when you're hungry. And I think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but what it's also saying is don't eat when you're not hungry. Don't eat because you're bored or because you're tired or because you're feeling cranky or you think you need a reward. Eat when you need to eat for hunger. But by the same token, don't skip meals, because the chances are when we skip a meal, we get very hungry later on. And I know I'm a past master at, it's 4 o'clock and I haven't had lunch. Oh, I can't be bothered making a sandwich now. And there's the chocolate or the nuts or the typically salted nuts with chocolate coating on them or something, and the unhealthy snacks creep in. So try to keep to meal times for meals. When we do eat, we need to eat slowly and to chew well. And of course the big thing too is portion sizes. And whenever I read the term portion size, I always remember trips to the States. And I remember the first time I ordered a sandwich in New York, there was this dome of material and I thought, that's breakfast, lunch and tea in one go. So I think we're lucky here, actually we have a little more moderation. But in terms of when we're in control of portion sizes, an easy trick is just use a slightly smaller plate. If you're like me and inherited the odd dinner set or two lately, there's often an entree plate in there. That's great for kidding yourself. You've got a full-size main course, you put it on the plate's nicely filled, and all of a sudden you're not eating as much as on a bigger plate. So that's a little bit about eating. Now, technology. Let's try the next one. Now, so that was the input, a little bit about the input. Now this is about the output of activity, because that's very important for us with our general health. And as the slide says, for good health, we're looking at 30 minutes of moderate activity per day. But we in the Cancer Council put another layer on that. If we're going to be exercising or active enough to prevent cancer, we're looking for 30 minutes of vigorous activity or 60 minutes of moderate. And the borderline between moderate and vigorous, an easy sort of rule of thumb is if you can keep holding a conversation, it's probably moderate activity. It's when you're running or walking so briskly that it's really a bit hard to talk and to keep walking as well, then the chances are that's got up into the vigorous range. Being physically active, we find, reduces cancer risk, particularly for bowel cancer, and it may also be relevant for breast and endometrial cancer. And there's some evidence to suggest that it reduces your risk of lung, pancreatic and ovarian cancers. And those last couple are pretty nasty ones, so I think anything I can be doing to reduce that risk is worth doing. The other good thing about physical activity is even if you don't start till tonight or tomorrow, no matter how late in life you start, it's beneficial. Every little helps, and it doesn't matter. It's never too late to start. And while we refer to it as physical activity rather than exercise, and as I read that I think, yes, exercise has a connotation of a formalised exercise program. I must go to the gym, or I need to make sure I play 3 sets of tennis or what have you. Physical activity in this context is all about starting realistically, building up to something you can actually maintain over time. And it needs to be something you enjoy and that fits in with the daily routine. Something that you feel good about doing, because you'll feel even better when you've done it, probably. Sometimes it can be very handy to do something with a friend or with friends. Maybe it's a walk in the morning, or dancing in a dancing group or something, because there's that extra little bit of motivation when there's somebody else who's expecting to see you there, or you want to go and see your friend anyway. So that can work well. And as we said, being physically active also helps with maintaining weight, and that helps to reduce the risk, a strong risk factor for cancer. And the activity needn't be a structured exercise program. There's all sorts of ways we can sneak a little bit of extra exercise in during the day. And I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts might be. I know when I was working full time, there was no way I was going to a gym during the day, but it wasn't too bad to hop off the train one station early and walk that extra bit going home. And that gave me an extra 10 or 20 minutes or so. Or maybe take the stairs when there's a choice between the stairs and the escalator, as long as your knees and ankles allow you to do that. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to share with the group that you might do in the way of just getting some incidental exercise in. Anything works for you?
I think it's walking instead of taking the car.
Ah, that's a beauty, yes. Also saves the mental strain of finding a parking space.
Yeah, well, of course you can't do it far, but you're going to the local shops, you can stop
Exactly.
a couple of 100 metres before the shops.
Yes, that's a brilliant idea. Any other thoughts?
What about gardening?
I don't see why gardening wouldn't be good exercise.
It's a very good
I think
exercise.
it's great exercise. You're out in the air and you're moving muscles to push things or pull things or saw things off or plant things or whatever.
And what about having a swim in the morning? That's what I do every morning.
Oh, good.
50-minute swim at Cherrybrook Pool.
Good on you.
So that's 5 morning, Monday to Friday. That's a great. And it's a discipline as well. You know, you get up and I'm first there 7:30, and they're in the pool.
Fantastic.
Oh.
We'll have no more name and shame then. We'll get on with it. But no, thanks for that, because it's those sorts of things and things that fit in with your lifestyle. As you said, it's a discipline. And so that's a really good thing to be doing. Now we talk about healthy eating rather than diet. And the big one is fruit and vegetables. You'll be sick of fruit and vegetables by the time we finish tonight, possibly, but they're very important. And they protect against a whole range of cancers: mouth, throat, esophagus, stomach, bowel, so all the digestive tract. And of all the aspects of diet, we believe that vegetables and fruit offer the most protection against developing cancer. And this protection, we think, comes about because of the chemical makeup of fruits and vegetables. They contain protective components like antioxidants, which can actually destroy carcinogens. They're also low in fat and high in fibre, so it helps to maintain the healthy body weight, which brings us back to reducing our risk again. So the recommendation is 5 serves of fruit and 5 serves of vegetables and 2 of fruit every day. But well, you might ask, what is a serve? Now there are some examples up there, and I've also prepared something myself. With vegetables, the surprise to me was a serve of potato. And even the slide says half a medium potato, and I think, what's a medium potato? I sort of have thoughts about how long's a piece of string. But we also say for vegetables, it's roughly 75 grams of the edible portion is a serve. That potato would just about qualify. So it's not a heap of. But then when you're going to get 5 serves, and we advocate lots of variety in colour with vegetables, because the different colours relate to different chemicals in the vegetables, which add to the range of protections. So our potato is 1. And in general, we're talking also about, there's lots of cup measures there. A cup of salad vegetables, or a cup of, it's the main thing, we'll come to the fruit in a minute, and the half cup of cooked vegetables or of legumes. So they're just 3 quick guides on the vegetable front. Cup of raw, half a cup of cooked small potato, or half a medium one. That's the vegetables. And when we look at the fruit, a medium piece, e.g. an apple, that may be a little bit large, but by the time you take the core out of that, there's not going to be a lot more than a medium serve there in the fruit. And again, we talk about the cup measures, the cup of chopped or canned fruit. And chopped and canned fruit, preserved fruit is fine. Just, we'll come to it, but be careful of the sugar content. But better canned fruit than no fruit. So that's the fruit. And another couple of options in the fruit is dried fruit. They're good. And we suggest 1 serve would be, I don't know whether you can see this actually, a tablespoon and a half of sultanas. Great for kids' lunches, and great, I find, for long drives to have a little container in the console in the car, and you can have something sensible without thinking, I've got to stop for an ice cream any minute now. So that's another suggestion in the fruit area. And I've been talking about the colours of vegetables. So it's a really good guideline to try to get 3 different colours of vegetables on the plate. Not too hard if you've got potatoes, carrots, greens of some sort, but use your imagination. And quite often people will say, oh, how do I get the kids to eat vegetables? Work out what food they like and then just load those with vegetables. If there's a pasta dish of yours that they're happy to eat, throw a few more vegetables in there and get them along that way. Salads at lunchtime are a great way of increasing vegetable intake. And when it comes to snack time, that's where fruit really comes into its own. Little self-contained snack packs, all of their own they are. And we've talked about both raw and cooked vegetables. Handy to have a mix of both. Steaming and quick cooking is also good for vegetables. But don't overlook the frozens or even the freeze-drieds, because typically they're picked and processed very quickly, so they're still nutritious. So that's the vegetable part. So you'll see we're not getting an actual diet, it's all about healthy things to put into your diet. And whole grains and fibre are an absolute must. They're very important. We think their greatest protection is against bowel cancer, and that's the second most common cancer in Australia at the moment, so it's worth taking note of too. The whole grain foods are typically highest in fibre, and there are some other protective nutrients, so that's why they work. So we recommend choosing breads and cereal foods, including pasta, rice and noodles. Aim for at least 2/3 of those to be whole grain when you've got the choice. So those are some positives. They're the things to include. We get a bit negative now. Lean meats are positive, poultry and fish, but there are some risk factors in the meat area, because our research is showing us now that diets high in red meat are associated with a slight increase in the risk of bowel cancer, and processed meats are the main concern. We're not quite sure why, but it looks as if it's the main meat concern is because of its fat content, can also be the way it's cooked, or because big meat eaters are missing out on vegetables and other protective elements in the diet. There is some limited evidence, but it does suggest that increasing your fish consumption can reduce the risk of breast, bowel and prostate cancer. So fish is good. There's no reason to cut meat out of the diet completely, because we do need the iron, the zinc, the vitamin B12 and the protein that comes from lean red meat, but we suggest moderate amounts. And a moderate amount is very moderate by Australian standards. No more than 455 grams of red meat per person per week. So that's under half a kilo a week. And maybe a small serve of about 65 grams of cooked red meat each day, or 2 serves 3 or 4 times a week. And a handy guide with a serve of red meat is about the size of the palm of your hand, which I know to some Australians is just barely a snack, but that's the recommendation. We also recommend avoiding or severely limiting intake of processed meats. That's things like salamis, corned beef, sausages, frankfurts, even bacon and ham. And the problem with them is the use of salts and nitrates used in the preservation, and they can be high in fat. As the slide indicates too, we also recommend avoiding charred or burnt sausages or charred or burnt meat. I don't know why, but when I was about yay high, I probably went to my first barbecue, which was out in the country, and I have there's the family story that now goes that little Miss Precious sat on the log and said, "I don't like this meat, it's all burnt." And now I say, oh, I must have known something I didn't know then, because it has been found that there's something in the charcoal that's not good, that can increase cancer risk. So our recommendation is to have some meat-free dishes each week, but You can still have poultry, fish, eggs and legumes and then fill the plate up with vegetables. So you won't go hungry, but just be aware of what's going in. Our next component is fats, and at least there are some that are good and some that I'm sure we all know about that we should be avoiding anyway. And the problem with fats is that they encourage weight gain, and as we've talked about, excess weight increases the risk of half a dozen cancers and also heart disease and diabetes. So the Cancer Council supports the dietary guidelines for fat, which advise us to limit our intake of saturated fats and moderate total fat intake, which means lean red meat and reduced fat dairy foods where practical. But a small amount of fat is necessary for our health, so a small amount. But there are healthier types of fats, and these include olive oil, canola oil, sunflower, soybean, sesame and peanut oils. So there's some good oils. The polyunsaturated and monounsaturated margarines. And fortunately we have good food labelling. It's improving, so we can tell which are the polys and the monounsaturated margarines. Avocados are good and a great substitute for butter. If you're making sandwiches, particularly with salads, great idea to spread with avocado instead of butter. All kinds of nuts too. They're okay fats. And the fish you've probably heard about, the oily fish, the salmon, the mackerel, the tuna and sardines, all good fats. The recommendation though is to avoid saturated fats because they can increase our cholesterol levels and then that starts a spiral. And the saturated fats turn up in butter, cheese, cream, ice cream, pastries, cakes, pies, chocolate. I hear people thinking, yes, all the good stuff I already enjoy. Yeah, I know, but that's the way it goes. Fried takeaway foods and the fat on meat products, coconut cream and palm oil. So most of the oils are okay, but palm oil is one to watch because that contains saturated fats. So I hope this isn't sounding too negative because we're getting into the avoid zone at the moment. Sugar's another one. Now, it has been suggested in the press in recent times that sugar causes cancer. That's not true. We have no evidence at this point that sugar causes cancer. The problem with a high sugar intake is that it contributes to excess body weight, and it's harder and harder to work all that off. So that's why we recommend keeping the sugar intake low, and particularly added sugar, because so many of the processed foods we buy already have a lot of sugar in them. Soft drinks, as the slide suggests, are a major concern. One can of soft drink can contain up to 9 teaspoons of sugar, which looks like that. And when I measured that out, I thought, I couldn't imagine sitting down and eating that little container almost full of sugar. But one can of soft drink can have that much in it. So just be aware that there is a lot of sugar already in what we buy. So we recommend high sugar foods to be taken in sparingly. There are some foodstuffs though that are naturally high in sugar. Some of the fruits have a high sugar content, but that's okay because we need some sugar for our bodies, and also those fruits will give us fibre and minerals which do protect us against cancer. So it's the manufactured foods containing sugar to avoid first. And while we're in avoidance mode, there's another nasty too to be careful of, is salt. And it's a little like sugar in that a lot of salt is added to the processed foods that we buy. So there's no need to add salt to the foods that we're preparing ourselves. And it's also, I mean, you'll see the term sodium chloride or sodium sometimes on food labels. It's all salt. A high salt intake has also been linked to a high risk of stomach cancer, especially where salt's used a lot in preserving foods. can also elevate blood pressure, which is not a good thing necessarily. So the Cancer Council recommends low salt foods. Try to keep it down to no more than 1.5 teaspoonfuls per day in total. That's about 6 grams. We need some salt for our bodies to work, but as I mentioned before, no need to add extra salts. If we need extra flavour in food, there's spices and garlic and herbs and pepper and vinegar and a whole range of other things that are probably there in the pantry cupboard somewhere, so go for them before you go for salt for flavour. We estimate that about 80% of the salt we eat comes from our packaged and takeaway foods. So if you don't have a lot of takeaway foods, you're doing yourself a really good turn. And the processed meats, which I mentioned earlier, they're also normally high in salt, which is another of the risk factors associated with them. And I have to say, I'm not happy about this, but good old yeast extract spreads such as Vegemite is also very high in salt. So all these happy little Australian Vegemites need to just put it on sparingly. And the same with olives, cheese and anchovies. They're all high salt foods. And I'm not sure whether you're a group of people who likes a glass of wine or a couple of beers. I've given this talk at times to a couple of different groups and it's been fascinating. Middle Eastern group who just looked at me and said, we don't do alcohol at all. An Italian group who said, what? You're telling us this about alcohol? But it is important. Alcohol is a risk factor for about 6 cancers. Mouth, throat, esophagus, breast, liver, bowel. Big ones. Oral cancers are 6 times more common in alcohol drinkers than non-drinkers. And the interesting piece there is even small amounts of alcohol increase the risk of cancer, and the risk increases with the alcohol intake. So the Cancer Council recommends limiting or avoiding alcohol consumption. If you do drink alcohol, we recommend no more than 2 standard drinks per day. And I'm going to show you what those standard drinks look like, because sometimes pictures don't always tell the same story. What have we got first? We've got the spirits. I just happen to have measured these at home before. That's our spirits. I'm not advocating green spirits. Be aware, this is tap water with green food colouring. It's not a green spirit, but it's a tiny bit in the bottom of a glass. It really is. But that is 1 standard nip of spirits. And then if we look at a beer, we've got, it doesn't want to come off. In our language in New South Wales, it's a middy of full strength is 1 standard drink. And where I got into real trouble with my Italian friends was the wine. Wine, a standard glass of wine, and now this is based on a 12% by volume of alcohol, the standard glass of wine is 100 mils. Often the wine bar glasses will be 150. So just be aware, there's not much in a standard drink. There really isn't much at all. So enjoy it when you have it. Some options might be to think about, if you're having a glass of wine, make it a spritzer and pop some soda water or something in it. The Puritans from the Hunter and Mudgee and what have you will probably scream at me for that, but it's a healthier alternative. Or alternate. If you're going to have a couple of glasses or something, put some water in between. Make sure you empty the glass before you start the next one. That way you can keep count more easily. All these little tips. And there's light beer and various other options like that. So that's the message with alcohol. It's not a lot. A lot of the evidence points to binge drinking, But I always thought of binge drinking as teenagers who've got nothing better to do on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, and it's hours and hours and hours. The definition the Cancer Council uses of binge drinking is 4 standard drinks in one session, which I think if I think back to my history, that's probably been, good dinner would be more than that maybe. So alcohol, be very careful of it, is I guess our message here. And if you thought alcohol was a no-no, try smoking. That's our next one. Tobacco really is the leading cancer risk of all our lifestyle options. It's responsible for the deaths of around 15,000 Australians per year, which makes it nearly 12% of deaths in Australia are related in some way to smoking, which is a huge number. 2 in 3 of all long-term smokers will probably die from smoking-related causes. Most of these people die at middle age. That's the sad thing about that factor. And the other one that's become much more known about in recent years is the exposure to second-hand smoke. Somebody else is smoking in the room, you're inhaling. Even though you're not getting all the full inhalation from a cigarette, you're still getting enough to do damage. It increases the risk of heart and lung disease, as well as sore throats, nasal symptoms, asthma, chest infections, eye irritations. So general health is not improved by smoke. Children in particular are very sensitive to second-hand smoking. So it's important that we protect them as well. And that's why, I'm not sure whether you're aware, it's now illegal in New South Wales to smoke in a car where there's a child under the age of 16. It's a $250 on the spot fine if you're caught. And that can be either a driver or a passenger, so it's be good when we don't get ashtrays in cars, maybe. But there is help for giving up smoking, and that's where the Quitline comes in. It's a very supportive service, and they recognise it can take a lot of attempts to give up smoking. Nicotine is such an addictive substance that it is really hard to give up smoking. But the Quitline is there, it's free, it's confidential, it tailors its programs to individual people. It even has a callback service, so it can call you if you, or maybe you want to tell your children or neighbours or somebody else about the service. The Quitline will actually help people on an individual basis by giving them a call to see how they're going during their journey. So it's a tough one, but it's not impossible to give up smoking, which is a great bonus for your health. Now, I imagine that you probably remember the slip, slop, slap campaign of whenever it was. We've now added 2 more steps in that program. We've added Seek Shade and Slide On Sunnies. And that's all because Australia has the highest rate of skin cancers in the world. We're particularly vulnerable to skin damage and skin cancers because of ultraviolet radiation, either from the sun or from sun lamps and solariums. The good news with skin cancer though is that most can be cured if they're detected and treated early. They're lethal if they're left alone, if you have a melanoma, but early detection, early treatment is really worthwhile. It can actually save a life. So just a gentle reminder of the slip, slop, slap. What have we got? Slip-on shirt and a close weave shirt is really good. This is an ancient bushwalking shirt, but it's a very closely woven fabric. And I find I now keep this shirt in the car if I'm doing a long drive, because I find it's really handy to avoid that dreaded exposure of your right arm, or is it your left if you're passenging. I just pop this on backwards when I'm driving, particularly if I'm on my own. Nobody else has to see this little fashion statement, but it just works a treat. Just stick your arm in like that, your arm's protected, and if you've got a low neck shirt on, that's protected too. So, or you can actually buy sleeves, just the sleeve alone, which are great for cyclists, drivers, gardeners, whoever. Slip on a shirt to protect you from the sun. Slop on some sun cream, just a little message from the sponsors. And they come in all shapes and sizes these days. SPF 30 plus is probably about the lowest of the sun protection factor levels we'd go to. The higher the number, the greater the protection, but you still have to keep reapplying it, especially if you're getting wet by skiing, surfing, gardening, whatever. Keep reapplying it and apply it liberally. It's worth reading the directions to see how much, because typically it's something like a teaspoonful per limb, which means one of these doesn't last you long, but it's handy to have around. So slap on some sun cream, slap on a hat, make sure the hat's got a broad brim on it. I always think that we leave the baseball caps turned backwards, leave that to the tennis players when they're playing at night under lights, because we need to protect your ears and that little bit of the top of your head that you don't want to admit, but when you look in the mirror, oh, it's a bit thin up there. That skin is very vulnerable, but earlobes are particularly vulnerable. They're very fleshy, and too many skin cancers turn up on earlobes. So make sure your hat can cover your head, your nose, your eyes, or shade them rather, not cover them. And we talked about seeking shade, and if you're going where there aren't going to be a lot of trees, take your own shade with you. I noticed in travelling through Asia how many Asian ladies will carry an umbrella for sun protection, and I just think it's brilliant. And it's so much cooler at times than wearing a hat. Whip your umbrella up, and provided you're not walking down a crowded street, it's fantastic. And Janice is smiling, and I imagine you've probably done it yourself, or your mother or grandmother has. No? Oh. Well, I think it's a great idea.
Our neighbour is Hong Kong Asian. I've never seen her outside without an umbrella up. All the time. She only walks out for 1 minute, she holds an umbrella up. So there you are.
Yep. I rest my case. Thank you for that. And what's our last one? Oh, I'll slip on the side on the sunnies. And when you're buying them, check for a couple of things. That they've got good protection. So the wraparound ones are really good that you can buy in the Cancer Council shops, because they'll stop the light from getting in here, because we get a lot of reflected radiation as well. If you're on the beach, sand is a great reflector of radiation. Snow's fantastic. I find white concrete drives my eyes insane if I haven't got sunglasses on. Lots of reasons to make sure that you've got the sides protected. And also, when you are buying new sunglasses, just check the little tag that's on them and look for the Australian standard number. There is an Australian standard number 1807, is it? 1067 is on the high quality sunglasses, and they needn't be madly expensive, but as long as they've got that Australian standard qualification, that indicates that they're a quality lens. So more about sun protection on the Cancer Council website. Something that used to be in the newspapers and seems to have disappeared, but it's still on various websites, is an indication of the UV pattern for the day. Are you familiar with that sort of graph at all? It's used to be published in the Herald every day with the weather forecast, but it's on. There's a link on the Cancer Council website, and I think Bureau of Meteorology website has it as well. You'll sometimes hear in weather forecasts they'll say, "Oh, UV alert," and on this example, it's the index is going to get up to 11 for the next day. Well, that's a scale of UV intensity, and it varies during the day and seasonally. So in winter, this graph is often very flat. In summertime, it peaks up, and even now, it's getting up, so we're getting into the high range. You can use this to plan your day. If you know you've got to spend time outside, try to make it at a time when the UV levels are not going to be as high, and give yourself an extra bit of skin protection. If you have to be outside in the middle of the day, and you know it's going to be a high UV day, that's when you engage all the protective factors you can find. So just another tool that we've got that can help us protect ourselves from the sun. And there is support out and about for various things that we've talked about for people of different ages too, because particularly if you're on your own, it can be really challenging to think, oh, I've got to think of all the food I can eat or shouldn't eat, and oh, am I getting enough exercise, and am I doing this, and am I doing that? Somebody else has probably done it before you, and somebody else will be doing it now. So there are various programs. Get Healthy is a New South Wales health program, and there are some little fridge magnets over on the table there which give you some contact details for Get Healthy. It's about making lifestyle changes in relation to healthy eating, being active and achieving and maintaining a good body weight. And they have individual coaches who will work with people who want some help. The Eat It to Beat It campaign is a Cancer Council nutrition program which works through primary schools and helps the parents to encourage the children to eat healthily. So that may be something that would be of interest for maybe your family members. There's all sorts of workshops and assistance available there. And I think too often if you just ask that famous Dr. Google online, eating healthy, see what comes up there. But I would caution you to check the credentials of the website of whoever's making the suggestions. The various cancer councils around Australia I would regard as highly trustworthy, but because there's a lot of information, but you need to make sure it's quality. If you ever have doubts about anything that you read in relation to health or cancer, and you think, oh, I wonder if that's really true, you can always call the Cancer Council Helpline. They're there Monday to Friday 9 till 5 on 13 11 20, and they are an amazing group of people. I know I rang them on one occasion when there was publicity about soy protein and I was unsure about whether it was a good or a bad thing to be involved with. And I phoned, and the person who took the call said, oh, I'm not sure, I hear your question but I don't know what the answer is, can I get somebody to phone you back? And I thought, oh, this will be a good helpline if it ever phones back, because so many don't. Day or so later I had a call back from the person who had actually written up the research that was being misquoted in the press. And I thought, you can't do much better than that. So that really converted me to the helpline, and I've heard other good reports of it since. It's a brilliant service. They can help with, if you're concerned about a medical diagnosis you have and you don't know what it means, you want to talk to somebody about it. Maybe you're just feeling a bit lost or lonely because you've had a diagnosis or a comment you really are finding it difficult to deal with. There are services that they can offer to put you in contact with people who may have had a similar experience. They can answer questions about how you're going to cope with treatment, right through to even financial things, because the bills don't stop coming in when cancer comes in. So they have ways of assisting people who may be having financial difficulties. They can put them in touch with people who can work with them. So that Cancer Council helpline is just a fantastic service. So feel free to use that whenever you want and pass it on to other people. And there are different support ways of getting in. If people don't have English as a first language, there's the translating and interpreting service, and the number's there, 13 14 50. There's also a website for the relay service, which will help the hearing impaired and those with speaking difficulties. So check on the Cancer Council helpline or the website, and you can find a lot of information which we hope will help you, because that's one of the reasons that the Cancer Council exists, is to help people through any part of their cancer journey, or if anybody else they're trying to help. And that brings us just about to the end, because we've been through some options on healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, without having a rigid exercise program. That's your homework, to work out how the exercise and the physical activity will work for you. Maybe it's continuing the good work you already do with your gardening and your swimming, or maybe it's something new you're going to take up, walking with a friend or whatever. But it's great that you've come along this evening, because I imagine you've all had a pretty close association with cancer in some way. So it's not news to you that cancer is not just a medical problem, it's actually a social issue. And that's the basis of what the Cancer Council is working to these days. We want to empower individuals to save as many lives as we can, as they can. and the Cancer Council was there to help that happen. So I thank you for coming out this evening, and I thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to take any questions you might have. Or if I've totally confused you.
Just the different. Is there a safe level of sun to accumulate enough vitamin D?
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
It's something. We can check. Check. Yeah, it's. I'm not going to get this quite right, but it's of the order of 10 minutes in a low UV time in summer and 15 in winter. It's a really low level. We certainly do need some exposure to daylight to keep our vitamin D levels up. That's the main reason for encouraging some, but it's a very small amount really. Check with the website, it'll be on there, and it's something I should know, but it's a small amount.
Thank you.
That's okay. Any other questions?
No one else?
With regard to exercise, and you put it up on the screen there, but one of the things that I heard at some stage was that high volume exercise in a very short space of time is something that really gets the blood turning over, is something that's much more important than anything else. That you can do a lot of moderate exercise over a relatively long period, but the real healthy help is to do a short burst of exercise. It may be only for 30 seconds or so.
Yes, have you been watching the same TV documentaries I've been watching? Because there's been quite a bit of publicity of that concept lately. I've not heard what the Cancer Council's opinion of that is, which way they go. That's why we still say 30 minutes of vigorous, but certainly worth looking at.
I think Catalyst was one of the...
Yes. I know there has been some research done, and it looks positive from what we hear, but I haven't heard through Cancer Council, so I'd have to say check that one.
I was watching The Checkout by chance last week, actually, and they were talking about dark glasses, and there was a level of 1, 2, 3, 4 or something on the glasses themselves that you should not buy anything that's not less than 3 or 4.
Oh, so was that something like a sun protection factor on the sun creams?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that, and we haven't had any recommendations coming out that I'm aware of, but the one that we look for is that Australian Standard 1067, and I think if you went to a Cancer Council shop, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape for getting reliable products. But then I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of people like me, and we have to have our sunglasses made up by prescription. So it's a matter then of asking the optometrist.
I think it's related to the UV level.
Yeah, I would think so.
I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, and you really shouldn't have anything that's less than 3.
Right, that would make sense. But as I say, need to check that out further.
I was saying that even the so-called exclusive sort of range cannot have the right glass.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Just because Christian Dior put his autograph on it doesn't make it UV protective.
Yes.
And it's definitely something to be aware of. And then, in fact, that goes through a lot of products. I think Choice has done some work on the sun creams, the sunscreen creams, and shown that, yes, the dearest isn't necessarily the best. It's a matter of checking the ingredients, and I would say to you, if you've got doubts about any of them, just ring that Cancer Council helpline, 13 11 20.
One question I would like to ask is, what is the Cancer Council doing with the government in relation to smokers? You've only got to go into the city streets, particularly any street, like Pitt Street and so on. There's so much smoke in those areas, and people are just blowing smoke into your face, standing in doorways and so forth.
Yeah, did you hear today on the radio they were talking about, yes, Pitt Street Mall,
Oh, right, yes.
about prohibiting smoking in all public places.
That's what I think that
Yes.
should be happening.
And
it
I would,
seems
yeah, and the Cancer Council's done a lot of work in anti-smoking advocacy.
Yeah.
A lot of work.
only got to go near any doorway.
Yes.
And they're all gathered around the doorway,
horrible.
and you can't.
Yes.
Get across the street or.
And you know, well, I find I notice it so much more now.
Yes.
20, 30 years ago, when there was a lot of smoking, we kind of just got used to it. Now, one cigarette, you smell it 50 paces.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The other thing is the government seems to be trying to solve the problem by increasing taxes on the cigarettes.
Yes,
I
well, the
don't know whether
Australian government did a brilliant job in the plain paper packaging.
Yes,
That's helped. But no, Cancer Council is very much behind non-smoking. That's an example of one of the advocacy campaigns.